Well, I'm going to welcome everybody to this afternoon's webinar. It is on enhancing the visitor experience through wayfinding. My name is Lauren Bohr, and I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator at Mohonk Preserve, and I'm going to be monitoring and facilitating this presentation this afternoon. Before I give a formal introduction to our presenters, I have just a few reminders for everyone attending this afternoon. If you could turn off your video and mute your audio, this will help out a lot. It will prevent any distractions for our presenters and the other people in the audience. If you do have questions, please use our chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat box as the presentation is going on, and there will be points, pausing points throughout the presentation too, where we can answer any questions. And of course, at the end, there'll be time for more questions if you have any. As mentioned, I am recording this presentation along with the conversation in our chat box. So please be mindful and respectful during this presentation and in the chat box as we continue on. So as I mentioned, this afternoon's webinar is on enhancing the visitor experience through wayfinding, and our presenters are Ed Pestone and Dan Cassidy. So I'll tell you a little bit about them. Ed joined the Preserve in May of 2015. He's held various positions within the Land Protection Department. In his current role, Ed coordinates and manages the land protection work of the Preserve, provides mapping and GIS support to other Preserve departments, and is responsible for the GIS data management and creation. He's a graduate of SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry with a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science, and he focused in on environmental information and mapping. And Ed is a local, grew up in Ellenville, and has deep roots in Ulster County. Dan Cassidy is our other presenter this afternoon. He's our Deputy Chief Ranger at the Preserve. So there's a chance that if you're on the land, you'll see him patrolling around, keeping everyone safe while they're out enjoying nature. So without further ado, we're going to start our webinar. Again, just a reminder, if you could mute yourself and turn off your cameras, that'd be great. I'm going to do the same for myself. I'm going to mute myself and turn off my camera. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Ed, and you can share your screen now.
All right. Is everybody able to see? I'm assuming if you can't, Lauren will say something. All right. So thank you for joining us, everyone, on a Friday afternoon. And just a little bit more background. Get the acronym out of the way. GIS is Geographic Information Systems. So that deals with basically spatial data. So GPS data, so what and a where, and layers, and manipulate data between software, hardware, and put everything together that way. So mapping, so computer mapping in the most basic sense of that. And land protection, as far as what I oversee, is the monitoring of our fee property boundaries and our conservation easements, and then dealing with the results of any issues that come up from that, as well as working on acquisition projects.
Yeah, I can do a little bit more extrapolation on myself. As Lauren said, I'm the Deputy Chief Ranger. So that basically means that I'm one step below the Chief Ranger, Andrew Bajardi, some of you might know. I've taken over a lot of Andrew's kind of day-to-day administrative stuff and just managing all of our seasonal rangers that come through basically from April until late October, sometimes November. So yeah, like Lauren said, you'll see me out there all the time. I've been here since 2017, and I've actually had a few roles as a different types of rangers throughout the years.
So just a quick overview of what we're going to be discussing, and a nice photo that Dan took a few weeks ago. So we're going to be talking very briefly about the basics of wayfinding, and then we'll get more in depth on our actual wayfinding project at the Preserve. So at its most basic form, wayfinding is basically from your starting point to your destination and back. In the most cases, that's not a linear trip, so you're going to have stops along the way. So you'll have kind of more of a graph like this. So you're not going to necessarily go from your starting location to your final destination. There's going to be some stops in the interim. So like the previous slide, you had starting at your house, going to Spring Farm to park first, and then you're going to hike to Bonnecue Crag. But there are other stops along the way potentially. Like if you're going to a different trailhead, you could go through New Paltz. You might stop at a local restaurant or a store at the end of the day or before you start your journey hiking out on the preserve. And that's kind of part of the whole municipal attraction, is to have people stopping in and out on their way to the preserve. And there's just many other examples of how wayfinding is incorporated into your everyday life. These are just some components of wayfinding, or the main components. So you got information, signage / markings, and maps. So information can be anything from what you find on a website, social media, mailings, any information that goes out like that. So it's basically what something is and why you should go do that thing. So like the preserve has a website, get information on where to go hiking, some attractions, etc. Signage and markings could be anything from road signs to signs along trails, could be trail blazes, etc. Maps they could be paper maps. They could also be Google Maps or applications, mobile applications. So there's wayfinding in a lot of different components. And then this slide is basically wayfinding components that's controlled by your destination. So as I mentioned, we have our website, we have signage along the road, trail signage. It could be even like local trails, local road signage, like if you at the intersection of Albany Post / Butterville and 299, you have the sign that says Mohonk Preserve Visitor Center a certain distance up the road. There are also wayfinding components that aren't controlled by your destination. So other websites such as Google Maps or applications like Avenza, which is a georeferenced PDF app. So you could bring in a map that's usually paper and follow yourself on your phone with a little blue dot as your GPS goes along. There's also interstate signage that's not the local thing, but you get more like attraction signage along the interstates, and other trail maps or other organizations that make trail maps out there. With the mobile applications, it's always critical, in my opinion, to check with the destination you're going to, because some of them could have outdated information or information on that's not really a recommended place for people to go, some like social trails and other things like that. So I'm going to make sure to see if this little poll will work, just to kind of gauge where everybody is on wayfinding. So if you just get a second to, and the I prefer to get lost is from one of our backcountry patrol volunteers who just likes to go out without any maps or reference and just find their way in and find their way out. This is a few more seconds here. All right. And share results. So you can see most people that are on the call right now are proficient with using maps and land signage. We only had one person who preferred getting lost. So, all right. And we'll continue with the presentation.
Great. So that kind of takes us into our mapping project and wayfinding project. So with the wayfinding basics, that Ed just laid out, the preserve in recent years has been working on a overarching wayfinding and map project. So that project basically is 20 years in the making, because our previous map that we're still using to this day in some respects was created, as far as Ed and I understand, about 20 years ago in 2000. And that was by Jack Fagan. Some of you may be familiar with that map. It's a folding kind of glossy paper map that we've been using for a long time. It's, grayscale map. It's been really effective, and it definitely works very well, but it has its downfalls and sort of inconsistencies and all sorts of things that we'll talk about. So the project really started with a grant that our Director of Stewardship, Chuck Reed, was able to push through in 2018, which was supported by the New York State Conservation Partnership Program and the New York's Environmental Protection Fund. It was awarded to us by the Land Trust Alliance in conjunction with the Department of Environmental Conservation. And that project and that grant rather was really the catalyst for us being able to take this project to its full extent. So what we did was we assembled a team of staff members to have all different voices from all different departments on the preserve to make sure that the input from different angles was incorporated into the map. So we had our stewardship staff, which is kind of varied. We have rangers, our maintenance staff, and visitor services staff. So people who do work on facilities and things like that, as well as the trailhead assistants and things like that. All the people that know the land well and understand it and have perspectives that are unique and important to make sure we incorporate. We also had the land protection department, mainly Ed and Julia, and we had education, development, and communications. So we were able to get all those departments, representatives from all those departments in this team to help us really get a full picture for the wayfinding project. So as you can see, this is our Fagan map actually. So this is the map we've been handing out for many years. And all those colored dots are essentially different points on the preserve that the map team designated and allocated as spots where people in the past we've noticed have gotten confused, turned around, and all sorts of things like that. So we'll get more into the details of that map and those locations, in a bit, but that's basically a representation of some of our first stages of trying to figure out, where on the preserve people are having a hard time with wayfinding and how can we help. So we labeled this unprepared hikers. And the reason for that is if you look at this map, it's an inset from the Fagan map. Obviously, it's got decent amount of detail. It does show some cliff lines and main roads and trails and buildings and such. But what it doesn't include, if you look at the blue dot in the right side of that picture, and then the white star in the upper right side, that's the East Traps Connector Trail, or as many as you might know, the Stairmaster. So it's a 300 stone step trail, and it's steep. I mean, if anyone's been on it, I think we can all say it's made us sweat. And so with this map and the information on it, what you don't really get is the elevation information, right? You don't, as a newcomer to this area looking at this map, you don't see, oh, that's really steep. I might want to, prepare myself in some way, wear the proper footwear, or maybe let's not take, a 3-year-old up this trail. It might be really challenging for them. So that map, although useful in many ways, doesn't include things like that for some hikers that might not be prepared and need that information. So basically, this is, us in the early stages before the grant and before the project really came off the ground. These are some sort of, micro versions of us attempting to solve some wayfinding issues on the land. The picture on the left is just a cedar sign that we have of a farm road at Spring Farm. And, we had some interns that were really helpful in some of the beginning stages of trying to solve some wayfinding issues. A woman named Michaela, who was an intern here, a Schroyer intern, did some sign inventory for us back in 2015, where she was collecting all sorts of data on all the signs on the preserve. And so obviously the first point of wayfinding, besides maps that are handed to the trailhead, are the trail signs, right? When you get to a certain trail, you see a sign that points you in a certain direction. So we had other interns, a man named Yannick, who did a bunch of hiking around all the social trails and documenting intersections and things like that, trying to get a perspective and an understanding of all the different kind of weaving trails that exist and trying to understand how these social trails sort of link up with other trails and confuse people. And then another intern, Dan Spiewak, who worked closely with Ed and the land protection department, did a little bit of a kind of a pilot wayfinding board project a few years back, where he was able to make some low budget wayfinding signs that he placed in certain spots where he believed and that was determined that people might be confused on the trails. And that was just an early project that was effective in some ways, and we were able to sort of take that idea in this bigger project and kind of bolster it. And on the right side, you'll see just a really quick sign that our maintenance associate director, Justin Key, created. Spring Farm is one of those confusing spots on the preserve that people tend to have a hard time figuring their way back to the parking lot. And so in response to that, Justin was tasked with creating these really quick, easy signs with these arrows telling you how to get back to the trailhead. And they were effective in some ways. Obviously, they're not really pretty and they're not super permanent. So these are just examples of things that the preserve has done in the past before this wayfinding project came off the ground. And these are just sort of the beginnings of the process. So this is actually a really crowded document, as you'll see. I wouldn't expect any of you to read it, but it is inventory, pretty much comprehensive inventory of all the trail signs on the preserve. That's just a snapshot of some of them. And myself and Ranger Scott Michelson spearheaded that project. We were able to go around to all the signs, take pictures, document which signs were broken or missing, or which intersections never even had a sign before, which sign posts might have been broken or withering away. And that was another beginning stage of this process, which was, I mean, the trail signs are important, right? We need to make sure that they're there when you get to an intersection. If there's no sign there or the sign is confusing or something, it's easy to get turned around if you don't know where you are. So one of the other main motivators for taking this project to where we did was that over the years, we've acquired a lot of new land. So you can see down at the bottom, the Foothills parcel is a very large parcel of land, which includes now 2 different trailheads. The Duck Pond Trailhead, which is at the end of Pine Road, some of you might know of. And then the Testimonial Gateway Trailhead, which is one of our bigger trailheads that is right off of 299. Included in those land acquisitions, we have the Merrick Hill Woods, which is still owned by the state, but is managed by us. And so that's the old campground, the old MUA, multiple use area, where we now manage that property. And then up in the top right corner, you can see the Giants Ledges Trailhead, which is close to Rosendale off of the Wallkill Valley Rail Trail. And that was also a relatively new addition to the Mohonk Preserve's land that we manage. So with all those additions, the Fagan maps that we've been handing out for years started to become less and less relevant because they didn't include a lot of those properties. And then with those acquisitions were the acquisition of new trails and miles of carriage roads. So we wanted to make sure that if we handed a map out, that map included those trails so people weren't confused and thinking, well, I'm on a trail and it doesn't seem to exist on this map. So we did some rerouting of certain trails, bridge replacements, things like that, all things that need to be updated on our map. So again, it started to make more and more sense that even though the Fagan maps in some ways were really useful, they were becoming out of date in a lot of ways. So this is the Fagan map. Some of you guys may have seen it. Very, very nicely done. Jack Fagan's a great artist, and he worked really hard. You can see that it's pretty accurate. I mean, it's pretty well done for a hand-drawn map. And it's got lots of information on the top. It's got the overall, maps and Mohonk Preserve information. And yeah, it's done a good job for what it was. So there's the backside. It does show some of the property boundaries. You can see that Minnewaska property is sort of in the gray scale on the left there. So it was good. It was definitely did its job for 20 years. And so this map had its pros and cons. So like I said, it was a unique hand-drawn map, so really nice. It generally represented all the trails and how they connected. It did a pretty good job of that. There was some grayscale contrast that was able to show the difference in properties. The labels were really easy to read for most people, I believe. It shows the full area map on the back cover, so you can kind of see where all the trailheads are and get an idea of where you are in space. And they were relatively cheap to print, so we handed them out for free. On the other hand, some major cons that we'll get into, there wasn't any elevation information like I talked about earlier. So you were handed this map and you had no sense, if you picked a trail and looked at it on the map, you had no sense of how steep it was, or really what you were getting yourself into in terms of elevation change. And the preserve boundaries, weren't super well laid out. Minnewaska was kind of there, but it wasn't really clear where the preserve ended and other things began. And they weren't easy to edit because it's a hand-drawn map. It's pretty much set in stone. Major edits basically require an entire rework of it from the artist. Some people had some difficulty with the two-sidedness, which we'll talk about later. We ended up actually doing something similar on our maps, but it can be challenging. And then there are some inaccuracies. A hand-drawn map isn't perfectly to scale. There are some issues with that real map users might be confused by or feel like leave something to be desired. So our goals for the project, as I kind of peppered in throughout my last few slides, is having a wayfinding system that's usable by most of our visitors so that we can be as inclusive as possible. Getting the new trailheads onto that map, really important, so we can be all encompassing. Incorporating new trails and the alterations to the trails that we've made over the years. So those things need to be put on there. Hopefully, the big goal is to reduce the amount of lost hikers. Give people the most opportunities they possibly can to get to their destination, take their little side tracks, and get back to their car without any problems. Elevation, as we talked about, something we really wanted to symbolize. Get some branding elements on there so that it's really modernized Mohonk Preserve stuff. And then having a digital version of the map is really great. 20 years ago, most people did not have a smartphone. In fact, they didn't exist. So now a lot of people have smartphones, and it's really great. It's definitely not entirely a replacement for a paper map or a map that you can put in your backpack that doesn't run out of battery. But it is really great, useful tool for us to have it on our phones because most people bring their phones with them. And we were trying to standardize all the preserve maps to make them all uniform and all the same across the preserve.
All right, so to make this process move forward, the main components of our wayfinding system are, of course, our main trail map, which is both paper and digital, our on-the-ground elements, so the locator maps, which are the "you are here" kind of maps that are on the ground. We'll get into more. Our trail signage and blazes, so the trail signage are directionals, along with the blazes as far as a thing to follow along the trails. Our section maps, we'll get into more detail later, but they're kind of a focused area around our major trailheads that give you a highlighted hike for new people to follow, or just one recommendation of a hike to start out with. So with our main trail map, we wanted to keep the size manageable, but also still fit the new trailheads on it. And a few slides ago, you'll see that the preserve is a rather odd shape, especially with the foothills. So maneuvering the preserve to fit on the map means that if you wanted to do it one-sided at the scale we went with, it would have been just a huge map. So if you've been into our visitor center, you'll see the new trail map that it's hanging by our conference room. That would have been the full size of the paper map if it would have done it on just one side of the paper. So we wanted the same scale or similar to the old trail map. As I just mentioned, we went with a larger or with a smaller scale, no, a larger scale. So a 1 to 12,000 scale for the map, which compared to others in the region, there's a map that is fairly popular as a 1 to 30,000 scale. We wanted the map color to, of course, include our branding elements and to use more common sense or more common symbology. So things that people are familiar with, I'll get into the symbols more later, but as far as colors and symbols, using blue for water instead of for trails that other maps have, for example, black for roads, etc. We wanted legible labels, so the size and the font that was used for the labels on the map to be able to be usable by most of our visitors. So a font that wasn't going to be too small, or like we didn't want to use a serif or a very fancy script or other illustrative font, just a very basic one. And we wanted the paper to be durable, of course. We didn't want this to be a one-use map. Since we're doing a full color, there was going to be some cost involved with that, so we didn't want the map. We wanted the map to last. For elevation elements, we considered quite a few options for this, but we really went back and forth quite a bit on just having contour lines versus shaded relief versus a combination. We knew there were going to be some visitors that weren't familiar with topographic maps, so we wanted the hillshade or the shaded relief to really illustrate, okay, this is a steep trail or there's cliff line or something like that, but still have the contours for those who it's useful for. So we ultimately went with the combination for the elevation representation, and you'll see later on in the presentation that we have other forms of elevation representation on the map as well. Of course, colors, so our brand colors, the green works out well for us because green is usually used for protected lands, blue is usually used for water, of course. So we were able to really incorporate more of our branding elements, but more than just the colors, we also, along on the trail map, we have other information about the preserve departments and others that we'll get into more. So for the colors, we went through many different variations of this. This is just one example. This is the actual branding colors that pull directly from the logo. You can see it's a bit dark with the hillshade over top of it. And we knew that there was going to be some darkening of the underlying shapes and everything by the hillshade because it's a gray overlay on top of everything. So these were just a bit too dark. So we ultimately compromised and came up with these colors, which were used on the final product. So this is the legend or all of the features that are shown on the trail map. So you can see we use things like a star for a place of interest. That's fairly common use. The trailhead, we have the hikers, parking, of course. The one thing that might seem a bit unusual is the purple for the carriage roads. And you'll see in the next example that it really kind of pops off the green rather than using like a solid, like more of like a red color, which for some individuals is tough to see on a green surface. The same thing with the trails. It might seem a bit unusual, but we incorporated the blaze color into the trail symbol. So when you first take a look at the map, you'll see a blue trail. You'll know that that's a blue blaze trail or a red blaze trail. And we didn't go with a solid blue line or solid red line in some cases because those colors, again, for some can be hard to see on top of a green surface. So you can see that there's still a trail in place with the black dash there also. So there's still some information that is usable. So this is just a zoomed in section of the trail map. You'll see that we have the elevation representation in both the hillshade and the shaded relief, but we also have elevation markers at each trailhead and at points of interest or places of interest as well. And so, and you can see the purple really does pop off that green color as well. So throughout the process, we had several reviews of the trail map. This is just a photo that gets used quite often for this purpose for the staff or an intern review of the trail map. This was an earlier version of the map. So if you're looking at it, you'll see it might, if you could see the detail, it's a little different than what the final product is. But we also had meetings with Mohonk Mountain House, which of course our trail network is really thoroughly interconnected with. And a lot of our visitors go onto Mountain House property and vice versa. We've also had meetings with Metawaska, which of course is another neighbor of ours. And we've had, I believe our hike leaders was a volunteer group that got a very early look at the new trail map when it was still in its fairly early stages of drafting. So this is our current trail map cover. We went with the Testimonial Gateway because the foothills was a big driver behind this project. 836 acres, a significant amount of new carriage roads added, Ridgeview Road as part of the River to Ridge Trail, which is a brand new carriage road, the 2 new trailheads, etc. So you can see we did keep some elements from the previous trail map. We kept the locator map. So we have the map that has the area trailheads and everything right on the back cover of the map. We were able to incorporate giant ledges in an inset map because it's separate from the main body of the preserve and is more easily accessed from the Binnenwater Kiln parking lot off of the Rosendale area of the Walker Valley Rail Trail. We also got Jottenberg. So we were able to zoom in. So that's at a slightly different scale than the rest of the map. So we were able to zoom in and show more detail in that area. And we have Spring Farm down here. This inset was here so we could have the seasonal and mode trails. So we got the $1 Million View loop, and we have more labels down here. So we just have the $1 Million View labeled as a vista on the main map, but in the inset we have $1 Million View. We also have the Lenape Longhouse as destinations highlighted on the inset. And this is the southern version. Again, we have the inset maps on areas that are fairly popular. So the Sky Top, Copes Lookout area, just have more detail because there's a whole bunch of trails jammed into a small area. So we had to up the scale a bit on this section. And you'll notice throughout, we'll get into more detail, but you'll see that there's some shifts in the Trailblaze colors, and we'll get to a bit more of an explanation on that. And so we also have the visitor center and an inset. And if there's anybody who wants to take a chance to raise their hand and answer where this photo was taken, what trail was this photo in the top corner taken from? If there's no takers, I'll just reveal it in a second here.
Give everybody like a minute, 30 seconds.
Is that Millbrook?
No, not Millbrook. Anybody?
Lost City.
Ah,
Lost City,
okay.
yep.
Yep.
Yep, Lost City was, so it was for a long time in a whole network of social trails, but earlier, not quite part of this process, but it was included in the new wayfinding system, the Lost City Escarpment Trail off of Kings Lane. So throughout the whole process, we've worked on adding both the new properties and new trails that were social trails by formalizing them through our procedures. And this is the Avenza version of the map. You can see it's the full preserve. So instead of having to flip the map over, have 2 versions on your phone, it's just one solid map. And this is the app that you could use on your phone to follow. Say it would be a blue dot, but if you started the Testimony Gateway, you could follow yourself where you're walking on the trails. And as I mentioned before, it is a PDF or georeferenced PDF app. So usually the maps are paper, but this app allows you to follow on your phone. And if anybody hasn't checked it out yet, you can scan the QR code right now and get some more information on it. Give a second. Any questions up to this point? We'd probably take a few.
There is a question in our chat. Carol asks, how do you determine the effectiveness of trail signs?
Yeah, I think I can maybe comment on that. I mean, honestly, it's not an easy thing to do. It's mostly anecdotal, right? So maybe a trailhead assistant gives some new visitor directions and tells them what trails to take, and then they might, talk to them at the end of their hike and say, "Oh, did you have an easy time finding it?" And they say, "Oh, I couldn't find the signs," or something like that. So really, it's not an easy thing to collect data on and really understand how effective they are. But we'll talk later about how we did try to make some of the trail signs a little more specific and give visitors a little more information while still being subtle. So we'll talk about that.
That is really the only question in the chat box.
All right. Move on.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the on the ground work, because while I was a part of the map team, another part of my responsibilities with the whole project was to get our wayfinding boards on the ground. It looks like we have a question. We can. Can you download the Avenza app on the Mohonk Preserve website? I believe so, right, Ed?
Not the, so there's, I know we were talking about putting a link to the Avenza map on the website. I'm not sure if that's up there, but it's usually through the app on your mobile device, or you can get it on your computer. It's Avenza Maps. If you just do a quick Google search, either Avenza Maps or Avenza PDF Maps. But we could show the QR code again at the end of the presentation if you want to, or scan that with your phone.
Great. So yeah, so installing the wayfinding boards, which I'll describe more in detail in a moment, as well as changing some trail signs and changing some blazes with the appropriate color change, trail color changes that we had. Basically, these on the ground changes were, attempts to identify areas that people frequently got lost, as I mentioned earlier, and see if we could resolve any confusion with maps or trail signage or blazes. And these locator maps, or wayfinding maps as I call them, wayfinding boards, give people an on the land check on where they're at. It says you are here, just like you might find in Minnewaska, they have similar ones, and it gives people a chance, if they kind of are turned around when they get to an intersection, it helps them kind of reorient themselves, hopefully. So this picture again here, we got the color coded different locations on the map. You'll notice I have like a little key in the bottom right side, if anyone can read that. We had three different options for these different confusing zones. One was just a large wayfinding board. One was sort of a medium board with a little bit less information, but still pretty comprehensive. And sometimes we decided just to change this, this area with a simple trail sign, one of those cedar signs you're familiar with. So here's an example of one of the wayfinding boards. This is at the bottom of the Clove path. So off of Laurel Ledge, also off of the Undivided Lot Trail. It's definitely, that swath of the Undivided Lot Trail is a long swath of trail, probably one of the longest uninterrupted trails on the preserve. And so we found, as rangers, I've responded to some lost hikers out there, people confused, they've just been hiking for what maybe to them feels like hours or could even have been hours. And we wanted to make sure at some point, if people found themselves lost on that trail, they could get to a map and hopefully reorient themselves and figure out where to go. So if you come to that trail, that intersection of Undivided and Clove, and you see that board, you'll be able to see the Mohonk Lake, the mountain house, you'll be able to see the purple carriage roads and try to figure out, okay, if I keep going on Undivided Lot, I'm just going to continue into the woods for quite a while. But if I go up this Clove path, I can go straight towards Mohonk Mountain House. Maybe that's where I came from. And so I can get back much shorter than, just wandering further and further. Whereas if that board were not there, you might see Clove Path, have no idea where Clove Path goes, how steep it might be. And you might not be so inclined to take it. You might think, okay, I just got to keep going the way I was going. So hopefully a map like this would really give somebody a lot of information when they might need it most.
Yeah, and again, just to point out, another indication of elevation, each wayfinding board or locator map has the elevation approximately at that location where the sign is installed. So you can see if you're going to Cope's Lookout from this wayfinding board, you're going from 551 feet in elevation to 1,200 feet in elevation. We also have little indicators like to Spring Farm or to Coxing. These are on most of them as well, the closest trailheads to that particular signboard. And my little thing that I like to point out is Moosey Brook. with a little asterisk next to it. That was a typo or a mistake on a USGS map years ago that just keeps getting carried forward. It's supposed to be Mossy Brook. So if you look at some other map sources, you might see the Mossy Brook labeled as Moosey Brook. So we just left that as a little Easter egg on a little section of the Mossy Brook Creek there.
So in installing these signs, I created this simple spreadsheet to, allocate the different intersections that these wayfinding signs are going to be at, and describing if they're freestanding, which, as you can see, all of these ones are, and then seeing if they've been installed or not. So it was, they were all over the preserve, as you saw in that map with the green and red dots. And so it was important for us to sort of collect our information and, be able to tick these things off, one at a time. And it definitely took a good amount of time to get each one of these out. They're not very light signs, and they're kind of all scattered about. So here we go. Here's some pictures that I took at the bottom of Clove Path. So that wayfinding board I was just talking about, that's Evan and Chris. They're a couple of seasonal workers that help Justin Key in the maintenance department. And they are doing the hard work that needs to get done to get these signs in. So you'll see Chris over on the left-hand side of the two pictures. He's digging a hole with a post hole digger. And then you'll see on the right-hand side, Evan got creative because we didn't want to lug too much equipment down, because we basically parked at Laurel Edge and hiked straight down the Clove Path, which some of you may know is definitely one of the steepest trails on the preserve. And we didn't really want to take too much heavy equipment. The Wayfinding Boards, that board above his head, is actually heavier than you might think. And that 4x4 post is obviously a good weight. And then we bring all sorts of tools, digging bars, levels, all sorts of things. And the last thing we wanted to bring was a tamper to pound down the dirt. So we used our surroundings. We took a big rock. There's plenty of them in the gunks. And we just pounded down the dirt to secure that sign into the soil with a rock. And it worked really well. So that's just a bit of a snapshot of the labor that goes into these trail signs. It's that one in particular was probably one of the more out there signs to get out. Luckily, we were able to hike down with the heavy stuff and hike out back up Clove Path without the sign and the post. So we were lightweight on the way back, which was good. But it definitely is a process to get these signs in there. So there's the finished product. You can see the sign, Clove Path, undivided lot on the right there. And again, I mean, if that map weren't there and you're a new hiker to this area, Clove Path means nothing to you necessarily unless you have a map. So you wouldn't really necessarily be inclined to take it unless you really knew where it went. So over there on the left, we got the map. It's pretty comprehensive. And then you can see in the distance, that's just a little side note here. We have some new blazes out in the Laurel Edge area mainly. They are sheet metal blazes that we just take a glossy spray paint and cover with whatever trail color we need. We're basically manufacturing them in-house. We cut the sheet metal ourselves and we spray paint them ourselves. And hopefully those blazes are going to be a little bit more long lasting. The bark on the trees, when we spray paint directly to the trees, can chip off and the blazes can start to disappear over time. And so we're hoping that they're a pretty good, relatively low cost, relatively low materials and low waste version for some new trail blazes. So you might see those out there mainly in the undivided, in the Laurel Ledge trails near undivided lot, all those places. So some more changes. So this is me on the left here. I have a giant cedar post, which also is quite heavy. You can see I have it on a mountain bike wheel, which is actually a specifically manufactured wheel that we use as rangers to carry injured hikers and climbers out. That wheel is able to be clamped to one of our litter baskets that we can lay people into when they're injured, and we can hike them out on a wheel instead of carrying them the whole way. It's actually got like a little brake cable you can kind of see down there. So we improvised, and myself and Frank Tack, one of the other long-term rangers, hiked that post on that wheel all the way up the Northeast Trail and then up the backside of Bonnecue. It took a while and plenty of sweat equity, but better than carrying the post on my shoulder. And we installed that post at the top, at the right-hand side. That's basically the top of Bonnecue. Before that sign was there, there really was only some blazes that might have indicated for hikers where to go when they're done with their views and they want to go back. And we renamed the trail. You can see it says Bonnecue Footpath. So it used to be just the Bonnecue Ascent Trail, which we felt like was a little bit not so clear, wasn't super descriptive on what that trail was. So renaming it Bonnecue Footpath was an attempt to give hikers an indication of this is the foot trail. This is not the rock scramble. So if you want to get to the top, you can take the foot trail up or back down. If you went up the scramble, you don't feel like going back down it, which most people don't. You can then take the footpath back down the backside. And there's the base of Bonnecue. You can see the red blazes on the rocks on the left-hand side. For those of you who've been around for a while, Bonnecue for a long time was yellow. And that was inconsistent with with almost all of the other scrambles on the preserve. Most of the scrambles are red, and now all of them are red. Zadie's Bower was changed to red down by Laurel Ledge and the Bonnecue Crag Trail. And if you notice, if you look at the map, the whole map, all the red trails on our new map are almost always either rock scrambles or very steep trails or both. So it's really easy for us as ambassadors of the land, when I'm talking to a visitor and giving them instructions and showing them a map, I can just say, if you take a red trail, it's going to be steep, it's going to be challenging. If that's what you're looking for, that's great. If you're not looking for it, I would avoid red trail. So it's really nice to have that sort of blanket statement to visitors. And in conjunction with that, the Crag Trail was always red from basically the Spring Farm parking lot to the base of the scramble, and then it changed to yellow. And so we figured for consistency's sake, we would just keep the whole line from the Spring Farm parking lot to the top of the Crag Trail, to the top of Bonnecue Crag. If it was just red all the way up, it'd be really easy to follow, and you get to the top straight on one red trail. On the right side, you'll see one of the old interns' first wayfinding signs, and you'll also see my 2 Bonnecue footpath signs. So at the base of the scramble, there's no real indication that you can get to the top of Bonnecue without doing the scramble. So that 2 Bonnecue footpath was one of our attempts at giving some people a little more descriptive language on our cedar signs, showing them you can get to the footpath by going this way, following the Northeast Trail. And in conjunction, there's that wayfinding board, and there's one at what we call the Cairn Rock, which is a big boulder with a bunch of rocks stacked on top of it. Many of you may have seen before. There's another wayfinding board there. So the Bonnecue area, very popular and very common for people to get turned around and confused. And so we really focused a lot of our wayfinding attention on that area. And then this is our Giants Ledges wayfinding board. You can see, since it's detached from the preserve, it shows that it's not connected. And you can see Joppenberg Mountain, so you can see where you might be able to park to get there, and that you'd have to take the rail trail to get into the trail network there. There is it installed. Hopefully this will give some rail trail users more information about the trail that they might be thinking about wandering onto. It'll show them that it is Mohonk Preserve land. It's got our branding, it's got the map. So before that, there was not really too much information for people. And then here we have one of our overview maps that's on the back of the main trail map, as well as it's at the Duck Pond and the Testimonial Gateway trailhead. So this gives people just a full scale view of the preserve and shows you where all the parking lots, those are those black circles with the numbers in them, shows you where all the lots are. It kind of just gives you a brief overview, not too much detail, but just a general understanding of the preserve as a whole. Okay.
Any questions at this time?
There is a question in the chat from Daniel. He asked, is there a trail on Giants Ledges?
Yes, so we have what we refer to as our lime kiln trail. So yeah, it's so this was another trail color that was changed. I'm not sure if it's been changed on the ground, but we changed it to blue instead of green to be more in line with our blazing system. But there is a nice vista out there as well that some refer to as white dot. But yeah, so there's a trail, and an official trail. There's a bunch of unofficial trails out there, but there is one or two. There's an official trail.
And in case people did not see in the chat, Julia shared a link. She says the Avenza map is linked from this page of Mohonk Preserve's website. You need to go to the Avenza app for the actual download. So there is a link on our website, and Julia has included it in the chat. So you can check that out.
Anyone else at this time?
Don't see any other questions coming in.
Okay.
Yeah, this was really a great presentation. I learned a few new things myself here.
Not quite done yet. So our section maps, as I mentioned before, they're a simplified version of the trail map that's really focused around the trailheads, and we wanted to have 1 or 2 suggested hikes on them. We still wanted to have the free element because we knew with the production costs of the full color map, we weren't going to be able to offer those maps free for everybody who's coming to the preserve. So we still wanted to have that option. We still wanted to have symbolized elevation in some way, but the grayscale made that difficult to have the shaded relief on there. We also, we could print this in-house, but they are also still available on our website. Probably in a similar area to where that link that Julia just shared, we have the suggested hike maps that you can either have on your phone or you can download and print them at home if you so choose. So this is just an example of one of our section maps. This is from the West Traps trailhead for the Millbrook hike. So you can see this allows us to have a place to put information. Right now it's COVID information, but hopefully by the end of this year, or hopefully by the summer or sometime this year, we'll be able to just have event information or other information that the preserve would like to share with their visitors. We have the breakdown of the hike distances, the elevation profile. I felt was fairly useful to have. That way there's a representation of distance and kind of change in the hike as it goes along. This is the actual map. You can see we don't have the shaded relief, but we still have the elevation at the trailheads and at key places. So if you're starting at West Traps, 870 feet in elevation. If you're going all the way up to Millbrook, you're going to up to 1622. And you get the distances of the loops. So if you start at West Traps and you just did Bayard, you're doing 2 miles, 2.5 if you're starting at East Traps. So just trying to provide people with as much information without being too overwhelming. It could be overwhelming to some, but just giving people as much information so they can make the decision if they want to do that hiker. And then this is our spring farm example. On this map, we have 2 highlighted hikes. So we have Table Rocks and Bonnecue, and you can see as Dan was talking about before, the Bonnecue Rock Scramble is included as an option. So as part of the suggested hike, you don't have to do the scramble. A lot of people do choose to do the scramble, but it's just an option. You can see we have the distances as well. And this was numbered. Since we have 2 suggested hikes, we have 1. So if you can't quite see the shading, you can follow the numbers and the arrows as well. So this is, again, an ongoing project, the main trail map as well, but just some pros and cons that we've heard about the paper, the section maps. It's still free. It's simpler for the trailhead assistant, especially this year. I mean, contact and communication with their visitors is vital for our visitor services staff or visitor experience staff or trailhead assistants. But with the influx of visitors that we had this year, it was great to have an option that was already pre-highlighted and somebody can just get a map and go about their hike. The suggested hikes, the elevation profile, we've heard it was useful if people were willing to look at it. And complexity is, you can see, is both a pro and a con of the hike maps, because for some it might be a little too complex still, but the complexity gives that information that people need to make the decision if they want to do the hike. Some cons, there is the potential for people to hike off the map if they just grab the section map and if our wayfinding system on the ground isn't quite effective at that point, they could find themselves hiking off that section map. It is just paper, so it's not really water resistant. There is the chance for litter. Somebody could leave the map behind. And there's, of course, change. It takes time to implement new systems, time for adjustment. And we'll see how things move going forward. This is just another grant acknowledgement that made this whole wayfinding upgrade possible. And as I said, it's going to be a continuing process. So any final questions?
We do have one question from Yvonne. Do the colored trail maps also show the thin bike lanes of biking that's available?
They don't, but generally our bike policy on the preserve is if it's a carriage road, biking is allowed. At this point, there are at least no official single track trails on the preserve. There were some on the Mountain House that we're working with due to other activity that has been happening. So most of the time, except for on Mountain House, Skytop and some other carriage roads are not, except Eagle Cliff, I believe. That's indicated on the trail map with some hashing on the Mountain House saying that no bike area, but for the most part, carriage road use for bikes.
Totally makes sense. Are there any other questions for Dan or Ed?
Looks like we have one. Daniel said, who should we contact if we have comments or questions about the maps? That's a good question.
That's a great question.
I guess that would be me, or you could go info@mohonpreserve.org, and that will be directed to me as well.
Yeah, I have to agree with Carol. She says very informative and needed. Great job. I have to agree. The upgrade in the maps is fantastic. I've used the new map many times to find my way around since I'm still relatively new on the land, and I'm sure other people feel the same way. The upgrade in the map has been really amazing and helpful. I know a lot of hours of hard work went into that. More hours than you'd like to count, or maybe you did count them. I don't know. You kept a tally. But I do know that was a lot of work went into that. And the new maps look great. The new wayfinding signs are also wonderful. So congrats on that accomplishment.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess we're right at like 4:01. That was like you did a perfect hour. So so yeah, this was really great. Oh, Marge says I really like the additional specific suggested hikes maps. So the section maps, like when you get to a trailhead, for some good suggestions. And yeah, that is really super helpful for people who've never been to our site before, finding their way around those great specific. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming this afternoon, taking a little time on a Friday afternoon, spend some time with us and learn about wayfinding and the improvements of our maps. And I hope that you are all excited. This weekend looks like gorgeous weather, and it looks like gorgeous weather throughout all of next week. So so pick yourself up a new map and head out onto the land to use this newfound knowledge that Ed and Dan gave to us. I want to thank both of you, Ed and Dan, for having some time this afternoon to meet with all of us and share all this great information. So thank you everyone for participating, and we hope to see you out in the land. Thanks everybody.
Guess they didn't get it.
Take care.